In April 1912, the RMS Titanic was not just a ship. It was a floating symbol of confidence, wealth, engineering, and ambition. Built for the prestigious White Star Line, Titanic was designed to carry passengers across the Atlantic in extraordinary comfort, from Southampton, England, to New York City. For many, the voyage represented very different dreams. First-class passengers traveled in luxury, surrounded by elegant dining rooms, private cabins, and modern conveniences. Below them, hundreds of emigrants from Britain, Scandinavia, and other parts of Europe were crossing the ocean in search of a new life in the United States or Canada. Titanic brought these worlds together inside one enormous steel vessel. But before the ship could complete its maiden voyage, it struck an iceberg and sank in the early hours of April 15, 1912. Around 1,500 people died, making it one of the deadliest peacetime sinkings of a single ship. Titanic was part of a much larger race for dominance on the North Atlantic. At the beginning of the 20th century, ocean liners were the main link between Europe and North America. These ships carried mail, cargo, immigrants, business travelers, celebrities, and the very wealthy. Shipping companies competed not only on speed, but also on size, comfort, and reputation. White Star Line's answer was the Olympic class, 3 massive sister ships intended to redefine ocean travel. Titanic was the second of these liners, following Olympic. When Titanic entered service, she was the largest ship afloat, a marvel of scale and modern construction. Her size was meant to reassure passengers as much as impress them. Bigger ships could feel more stable, more powerful, and more permanent. Titanic seemed to represent the future of travel, built on the belief that technology could master even the dangerous North Atlantic. The ship was built in Belfast by Harland and Wolff, one of the leading shipbuilding companies of the age. Constructing Titanic required enormous industrial coordination. Steel plates, rivets, engines, boilers, cabins, electrical systems, and miles of interior fittings all had to come together inside one vessel. Thomas Andrews Jr., the chief naval architect at the shipyard, played a central role in the design. He knew the ship intimately, from its grand public rooms to its technical systems hidden deep below the decks. Titanic was not a careless or primitive creation. It was the product of some of the most advanced marine engineering available at the time. That makes the disaster more haunting. The tragedy was not simply that an old or weak ship failed. It was that one of the most celebrated machines of its era encountered a chain of events, assumptions, and limitations that proved fatal. One reason Titanic gained such a powerful reputation was its safety design. The ship had watertight compartments divided by bulkheads, and remotely activated watertight doors that could be closed in an emergency. In theory, these features allowed sections of the hull to flood while the ship remained afloat. This contributed to the popular belief that Titanic was practically unsinkable. The exact phrase has often been exaggerated by legend, but the underlying confidence was real. Passengers and the public believed that modern engineering had greatly reduced the old dangers of sea travel. The problem was not that the safety features were useless. They did help slow the disaster and bought precious time. But they were not designed for every possible kind of damage. When the iceberg opened multiple compartments to the sea, the system could not save the ship. Titanic's first-class spaces were designed to rival luxury hotels on land. Passengers could use a gymnasium, a swimming pool, smoking rooms, fine restaurants, cafes, and a Victorian-style Turkish bath. Cabins ranged from comfortable to astonishingly opulent, reflecting the social hierarchy of the period. The ship carried some of the wealthiest people in the world, and their presence helped make Titanic famous even before the disaster. Yet Titanic was not only a palace for millionaires. It was also an immigrant ship. Many passengers in third class had saved money for the journey and saw the crossing as the beginning of a better future. This contrast is essential to understanding Titanic. It was a single ship, but it contained many different versions of the early 20th century world: privilege, ambition, labor, migration, and hope. Command of Titanic was given to Captain Edward John Smith, one of White Star Line's most experienced captains. His presence added to the sense that the voyage was in safe hands. Also aboard was J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of White Star Line, whose company had invested enormous prestige in the ship. Thomas Andrews, the designer, traveled as well, observing how Titanic performed in service and noting possible improvements. These men represented different layers of authority: navigation, business, and engineering. Their fates would become part of the legend. Captain Smith went down with the ship. Thomas Andrews died in the disaster after reportedly helping passengers during the evacuation. Ismay survived in a lifeboat, a fact that made him deeply controversial afterward. The sinking did not just destroy a ship, it placed leaders under the harshest possible public judgment. The voyage began with optimism. Titanic left Southampton and headed west across the Atlantic, carrying 2,208 passengers and crew. On board, daily life continued with the routines of an ocean crossing. Passengers sent messages using the ship's powerful radio telegraph transmitter, which allowed communication far beyond the vessel itself. For wealthy passengers, wireless messages were a modern convenience, like sending notes across the ocean. For the ship, radio would become a lifeline. But the North Atlantic in April was dangerous. Icebergs drifted south from colder waters into shipping lanes, and ships depended on lookouts, warnings, judgment, and speed management. Titanic's reputation did not remove the environment around it. However grand the liner looked, it was still crossing a vast ocean at night, where visibility, distance, and reaction time could determine life or death. Late on April 14, Titanic struck an iceberg. The collision was not a dramatic head-on crash that instantly smashed the ship apart. Instead, the iceberg damaged the hull along the side, allowing seawater to enter multiple compartments. This distinction matters because Titanic's safety system could survive some flooding, but not flooding spread across too many sections. Once enough compartments were open to the sea, the bow began to sink lower. Water then moved in ways the designers had not intended the ship to endure. The disaster unfolded over hours, not seconds. That slow progression created both opportunity and confusion. There was time to launch lifeboats, send distress signals, and organize passengers. But there was also disbelief. A ship so large, so new, and so trusted did not feel like something that could simply vanish beneath the surface. The lifeboat situation became one of the most painful parts of the Titanic story. The ship had 16 lifeboat davits, and each davit was capable of lowering 3 lifeboats, which meant the ship had space to handle as many as 48 boats. But Titanic actually carried only 20. Together, those boats could hold 1,178 people, roughly half of the number aboard and only about a third of the ship's full possible capacity. This seems shocking today, but it was consistent with maritime regulations of the era. British Board of Trade rules required 14 lifeboats for a ship over 10,000 tons, and Titanic carried more than that. The problem was that the regulations had not kept pace with the size of modern liners. Safety law was still thinking in old categories while ships had become enormous floating cities. Even the lifeboats Titanic did have were not used to full capacity. When the lowered boats left the ship, they carried on average only about 60% of the people they were rated to hold. Several factors contributed to this. Officers and crew were uncertain about how much weight the boats could safely bear once lowered. Some passengers hesitated to leave the apparent safety and warmth of the ship for a small boat in the dark ocean. The evacuation also happened under pressure, with incomplete information and rising urgency. 4 of the boats were collapsibles, and these proved difficult to prepare while the ship was sinking. In hindsight, every empty seat feels unbearable. But in the moment, the disaster combined confusion, class barriers, procedure, fear, and the deadly human tendency to underestimate a crisis until it is too late. As Titanic sank, the human cost became catastrophic. Families were separated. Crew members stayed at their posts. Passengers faced impossible choices in freezing darkness. Of the 2,208 people aboard, approximately 1,500 died, though estimates vary. The scale of the loss shocked the world because Titanic had represented safety and progress. The disaster cut across social classes, but survival was not evenly distributed. Access to information, location on the ship, crew instructions, and social rules all shaped who reached lifeboats. The deaths of Captains Smith and Thomas Andrews became symbols of duty and tragedy, while the survival of Bruce Ismay became a focus of public anger. People wanted not only to mourn, but to assign meaning and responsibility. Titanic became more than an accident, it became a moral story about confidence, inequality, and failure. The sinking of Titanic forced the world to rethink maritime safety. Public attention was enormous, and the disaster helped spur major changes in regulations. The most obvious lesson was lifeboat capacity. Ships needed enough space for everyone aboard, not merely the minimum required by outdated tonnage rules. The disaster also highlighted the importance of radio communication, emergency procedures, iceberg warnings, and constant readiness. Titanic's legacy lasted because it exposed a dangerous gap between technological confidence and practical preparedness. The ship had advanced features, but safety is not only about impressive design. It is about planning for failure, training for panic, and assuming that even the strongest systems can be overwhelmed. More than a century later, Titanic remains famous not simply because it sank, but because it reminds us how disaster can emerge when ambition outruns caution. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.